The war had stretched across the stars like a wound that refused to heal, and every world that burned left another scar upon the hearts of those who fought within it, and among those weary soldiers stood Captain Rylan, a man who had long forgotten the taste of peace or the sound of laughter, and now, as the battle for the Orion frontier finally ended, he walked through the ruins of what was once a shining alien citadel. The sky above him still trembling with the echo of orbital fire, and the scent of metal and ash clinging to every breath he took. He had fought for so long that he no longer remembered why the war had begun, only that it had consumed everything he had ever known, and everything he had once been proud of. Now he looked upon the fallen towers and broken monuments of the Orion clans and wondered if any victory could ever justify so much ruin. He stepped over shattered armor and the remains of machines, both human and alien, alike, their shapes twisted into grotesque sculptures of defeat, and in their silence he heard the faint whisper of his own conscience, asking if this was the glory he had. But Ben promised. The battlefield stretched for miles across the cracked plains, and as the twin suns began to rise there, pale light revealed the aftermath. In all its desolation, soldiers moved among the debris, collecting wounded allies and securing prisoners, and the command banners of Earth fluttered weakly in the wind that carried the ashes of both sides. Rylan had once believed that the banner stood for unity and survival, but now it looked to him like a shadow cast over everything he had helped destroy. He remembered the last stand of the Orion warriors, fierce and graceful, their movements fluid and fearless, even when outnumbered, their technology elegant and strange, their voices chanting words he did not understand yet somehow felt he should, and when they finally fell, their defiance did not fade. It remained in their stillness, like an unspoken curse upon the victors, and as Rylan stood amid their fallen ranks, he felt no joy, only a deep cold that settled behind his ribs where pride had once lived. The call came through his comlink, ordering him back to the forward command ship, the flagship of the victorious fleet, its vast hull still glowing with the heat of battle, and its banners displayed in triumph. And he obeyed the summons as he always had, his steps heavy, his armor scorched, his spirit quieter than it had ever been before. He did not know what awaited him aboard the ship, only that it would be more ceremony, more speeches, more hollow promises of a peace that no one truly believed in anymore. As he ascended into the transport shuttle, the engines roared beneath him, and the planet below faded into a blur of gray and flame, and Rylan looked down one last time upon the world they had conquered, and wondered if perhaps, in the moment of victory, humanity had lost something greater than any enemy could ever take from them. Transport shuttle carried Captain Rylan through the vast emptiness of space, toward the flagship of the human fleet, a colossal vessel known as the Resolute, its metallic hull reflecting the distant light of dying stars, and the silent wreckage of enemy ships drifting like ghosts in the dark. His armor still bore the scorch marks of the last battle, his gloves stained with dust from the ruins he had walked through, and though he sat among other soldiers, none spoke, for there were no words left to fill the silence between them, only the hum of the engines and the faint vibration of the ship echoing like a heartbeat of a war that refused to die. When the shuttle finally docked, he stepped onto the steel floors of the Resolute, greeted by corridors lined with banners and guards who saluted with mechanical precision, their eyes empty of wonder, their movements rehearsed as if victory itself had become just another task to be completed and forgotten. He followed the path marked 4 officers, passing through chambers where the scent of fuel and disinfectant mixed with the metallic temps of recycled air, and everywhere he looked he saw reminders of conquest, alien weapons displayed behind glass cases, alien symbols carved into fragments of broken armor, trophies of a conflict that had stripped both sides of mercy. At the end of the long corridor, the command hall opened before him, vast and cold, with towering walls of holographic light projecting the map of the Orion territories now painted in the colors of Earth, and at the center stood General Ormond, a man whose face was carved from stone, and whose voice carried the weight of authority sharpened by victory. He turned as Rylan entered, his eyes bright but without warmth, and he spoke words that echoed through the hall, words of praise, words of duty, words that felt to Rylan like the hollow echoes of a forgotten prayer. The soldiers gathered there, clapped and shouted his name, calling him a hero of the frontier, their voices filling the air like thunder. Yet in the noise, Rylan heard only the quiet voice within himself asking, Why, he felt nothing at all, and then the general raised his hand and the room fell silent as a pair of guards entered through the side doors, bringing with them a figure who moved with the grace of a shadow. She was unlike any being Rylan had ever seen, tall and lithe, her skin a pale hue that shimmered faintly under the lights, her eyes the color of molten gold, and her ears, rising to fine points through strands of dark silken hair that framed her face. The general announced that this was Kara, a warrior from the Orion clans captured alive during the siege of the last citadel, and that she was now to be presented to Captain Rylan as a reward for his valor. Her chains glimmered under the cold light of the hall, but her gaze was unbroken, steady and fierce, meeting Rylan's without fear. And in that moment something within him shifted like a crack opening in stone, and he realized that the victory they celebrated might not have been victory at all. The hall seemed to hold its breath as the general's words faded, and the silence that followed was heavier than any roar of battle. Rylan stood still, staring at the alien woman before him, her posture proud, though bound by chains that caught the light with every subtle movement. Her presence filled the vast chamber in a way no speech ever could, and even the soldiers who moments before had shouted in celebration now watched in uneasy quiet. The general stepped forward, his voice breaking the stillness as he declared that Captain Rylan was to accept this living prize as proof of his unmatched loyalty and courage, a reward for his service to humanity, and a symbol of Earth's triumph over the Orion clans. Rylan felt the weight of every gaze upon him, yet all he could see were her eyes that did not belong to a conquered enemy but to someone who had lost everything and still refused to bow. Her name echoed in his mind, Kara, the last of her command. Her chains did not make her weak. They only made her defiance more visible. The general motioned for Rylan to approach, and as he did, his boots struck the steel floor with the rhythm of a heart he could barely feel beating. He reached out to take the control rod that released the magnetic cuffs, and the cold device felt like a shard of guilt pressed into his palm. He wanted to speak, but no words came. The applause that followed the general's announcement washed over him like static, empty and distant. His fellow officers cheered, lifting their glasses and shouting to the glory of the fleet, their laughter hollow beneath the glittering lights of conquest. And yet Rylan stood, unmoving. Kara's gaze locked on his, and in that gaze he saw neither hatred nor fear, only the quiet judgment of someone who saw through him as though his armor and his medals were nothing but ashes. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed, and the general offered a final salute, his voice calm and measured, telling Rylan to remember that discipline and loyalty were the foundations of peace, that mercy was weakness, and that symbols like this one were necessary to remind their enemies of who ruled the stars. Rylan nodded because it was what was expected of him, but deep inside, something had begun to unravel. A question that had been buried under years of orders and obedience began to stir like an ember refusing to die. He was instructed to take her to the lower deck where prisoners were processed and catalogued, yet, as he walked beside her through the dim corridors, illuminated by flickering white light, he felt the air grow heavier, each step echoing through the steel tunnel. Kara said nothing, her expression calm, unreadable, and yet her silence spoke louder than any plea. She did not see him as a master nor as a savior, only as another soldier carrying the burden of choices. He no longer understood, and when they reached the cell chamber he hesitated, his hand hovering over the access panel, while his thoughts warred within him, unsure if the line between victory and cruelty had already vanished long ago. The corridor lights flickered dimly as Rylan stood before the reinforced cell door, his gloved hand still hovering above the access panel. The air was thick with the hum of engines and the low murmur of distant machinery, the ship alive and restless. In the silence between them, Kara watched him, her golden eyes steady and unblinking. She did not plead, she did not ask for mercy. She simply waited, her presence calm and unyielding, like a flame that refused to die. Rylan finally pressed his palm against the panel and the door slid open, revealing a narrow chamber lined with steel walls and a single light that hung above, casting long shadows that seemed to move with the rhythm of his breathing. She stepped inside without hesitation, her movements graceful and silent, her chains rattling softly as if to remind him of the price of obedience. The sound followed him even after the door closed, the echo lingering in his mind like a whisper. He could not escape. He turned away, but her eyes stayed with him as he walked down the corridor, each step heavier than the last, until he could no longer tell whether he was walking away from her or from himself. That night he sat alone in the observation bay, the stars stretching endlessly beyond the glass-like shards of broken dreams. He remembered the general's words, about peace through strength and victory through fear, but those words now felt empty, hollow echoes that dissolved against the quiet vastness of the void. He thought of Kara's silence, the way she had looked at him without hatred, without submission, and it unsettled him more than any battlefield ever had. He realized that he had seen countless enemies fall, but he had never seen one who made him question why they had fought. In the first place, hours passed, though he could not tell how many time aboard the ship had lost, meaning replaced by the endless rhythm of duty and the quiet ticking of regret. When he finally rose, he found himself walking back toward the detention wing, unsure why his feet carried him there. The guards at the entrance looked up but did not question him. His rank alone was enough to grant him access, and as he stepped inside he felt the cold air of the lower decks wrap around him like a sat in the corner of her cell, her posture still upright, her eyes following him. As he approached, she spoke for the first time, her voice soft yet sharp like the edge of a blade, asking if he knew what his people had taken from her as he could not answer, for there were too many truths he had ignored for too long. She told him of the Orion worlds, their oceans of lights, their temples that sang in harmony with the wind, their belief that all life was bound by balance, and he realized how little he truly understood of the enemy he had been taught to hate. When she finished, she looked at him with quiet sorrow, and said that no war ever ends with victory, only with loss, and for the first time, Ryland could not find any part of himself that disagreed. Her words sank into him like seeds buried in barren soil, waiting for a future he did not yet understand. The hum of the ship carried through the steel corridors like a heartbeat that refused to fade, and Captain Ryland found himself returning again and again to the detention wing, drawn by something he could not name. Each time he approached Kara's cell, he told himself it was duty that he sought, intelligence, or perhaps some insight that might serve command, but deep inside he knew that was a lie. Her words from the night before had settled into his mind like a quiet storm, and he could no longer silence them. No matter how hard he tried, Kara would sit in the same corner, her eyes half closed as if she could see something beyond the walls that confined her. She did not flinch when he entered, and she did not bow when he spoke. She would simply listen and answer in that calm, measured tone that made his authority feel fragile. She spoke of the Orion clans, not as enemies but as a people who had lived by the harmony of the stars, who built cities that grew instead of destroyed, who fought only when balance was broken. And as she spoke, Ryland began to realize that the stories told to him about them had always been half-truths, shaped by fear and pride. He asked her why she had fought knowing defeat was certain, and she replied that honor was not about victory. It was about refusing to let others decide what you were worth. Her words carried no bitterness, only a quiet strength that made him wonder if he had ever fought for something so pure. He thought of the medals that lined his quarters, the plaques, the speeches, all the hollow signs of valor that had once filled him with pride. Now they seemed meaningless, like reflections on broken glass days, blurred into one another as the ship drifted through the void heading toward Earth, and the whispers among the crew began to grow. They spoke of Kara as a curiosity, a prize, a reminder of the conquered, but, to Ryland, she had become something else, a mirror in which he saw the cracks of his own humanity. He brought her water, better food, small gestures that he justified as acts of discipline, yet each time he lingered at the cell door his reasons grew harder. To defend one evening when the lights dimmed to simulate night, Kara asked him if he believed in peace. He hesitated, unsure how to answer. She said that peace was not the absence of war but the courage to face the truth that comes after it, and when she said those words he felt a weight in his chest that no battle had ever given him. It was guilt and clarity bound together, a feeling he could not name but could no longer deny. He left the cell that night, walking through the silent corridors, and for the first time he did not feel like a soldier. He felt like a man lost between the ghosts of what he had done and the faint glimmer of what he might still become. And as the stars outside the viewport shimmered cold and distant, he wondered if redemption was something that even existed in the endless dark. The days stretched into long silences, broken only by the steady pulse of the ship's engines and the distant footsteps of soldiers carrying out orders that no one questioned. Captain Ryland moved through his duties like a shadow, his thoughts never far from the lower decks where Kara remained, though she was still a prisoner. Their conversations had changed the air between them, no longer heavy with threat but filled with something quieter and far more dangerous, understanding. He began to visit her more often, sometimes bringing data pads, sometimes sitting in silence, as she traced symbols from her language on the cold floor, and told him what they meant, each line and curve, part of a story that reached back farther than human memory. She taught him words from her tongue, soft, melodic sounds that carried meanings that could not always be translated into his own language. He struggled to repeat them, and she would correct him with a faint tilt of her head, her golden eyes bright with something close to patience. Sometimes, she would ask him to teach her the human words in return, and when she spoke them, her voice carried strange rhythms that made the language sound new, as though it had never belonged to war or conquest. He found himself waiting for those moments, each day small fragments of peace, hidden between the machinery and steel, rumors spread among the crew, whispers that the captain had grown too close to the alien, that he had begun to question orders, and though no one dared confront him openly, he felt the weight of their stares, the quiet suspicion that followed him down every corridor. The general's voice still echoed in his memory, reminding him that mercy was weakness and that loyalty was the only virtue left worth keeping. But that voice now felt hollow compared to Kara's quiet truth. One evening, as they sat across from each other, the hum of the engines softer than usual, Kara told him that her people believed all souls carried light, and that even in darkness the light could find its way if given time. She said that she could see a light in him, though buried deep beneath the scars of obedience and fear. Her words unsettled him because he wanted to believe them, and yet he could not forgive himself for what he had done, for the lives he had taken, for the worlds that no longer existed. That night he stood in the observation deck again, the stars stretching endlessly before him, and he imagined the Orion worlds she had described, oceans that shimmered with living light, forests that sang in the wind, cities built from crystal and sound, and he wondered how many such wonders humanity had erased in its hunger to conquer. He realized then that if Kara had been given to him as a symbol of victory, she had become instead a reminder of everything they had lost, and in that realization he felt something inside him begin to change, something that could no longer be silenced. The message from High Command arrived without warning, a sealed transmission marked with the insignia of the Earth Council. Its tone sharp and final. Rylan read the words slowly, his stomach tightening with each line. The directive was clear: all captured Orion subjects were to be transferred to research divisions upon return to Earth. They were to be examined for biological and technological study, and their continued survival would depend on the results. Rylan stared at the screen until the words blurred together, and the only thing he could hear was the quiet pulse of his own heartbeat echoing through the silence. He knew what research meant. He had seen the aftermath of such orders before, and the memories came rushing back. Cages, cold white rooms, the sound of screams that never reached the reports, filed neatly under the label of progress. He closed the file and stood motionless, the weight of duty pressing against the edges of his thoughts. For years he had obeyed without question, because obedience was the only way to survive, but now, the cost of that obedience stood before him in the form of a woman who had done nothing but speak the truth. He walked the length of the corridor, each step slower than the last, the lights flickering faintly above him. He could still turn away. He could tell himself that it was not his decision, that he was just one man among thousands, but the thought hollowed him out because he had told himself those same words too many times before, and each time something human had slipped further away. When he reached Kara's cell, she was waiting, her eyes steady, her posture calm, as though she already knew what had come. He told her what the message said, his voice low and uncertain. She did not react with anger or fear. She only nodded slowly, as if the truth confirmed something she had always expected. She said that every war ends the same, with the victors believing they can own what they do not understand, and for a moment Rylan wanted to argue, but the words would not come. She asked him what he would do, and he could not answer, because every path he saw led to betrayal, either of her or of everything he had sworn to uphold. That night he did not sleep. He sat in his quarters, staring at the medals hanging on the wall, their polished surfaces reflecting the faint light of the ship, and in their reflection, he saw nothing of honor, only ghosts. He remembered the faces of those who had followed his orders, the civilians who had fled the burning cities, the silence that followed every bombardment, and he realized that he had already lost the right to call himself righteous. When the ship's artificial dawn began to rise, he made his decision. It was not spoken or reasoned, it simply existed, a quiet truth that filled the hollow inside him. He would not let her be taken. He would not allow another atrocity hidden behind the mask of victory, and as he armed himself and prepared to defy the command, he knew that this act would end his career, his freedom, perhaps even his life, but for the first time in years he felt that his actions might finally mean something. The ship slept beneath the artificial night, its endless corridors lit only by the dim glow of red emergency strips, and the quiet hum of engines that never ceased. Ryland moved through the lower decks with the precision of habit, each turn memorized, each corner marked by years of routine, yet tonight every step felt different, heavier, as though the walls themselves knew what he intended. His pulse beat steady against the metal of his armor, his breath controlled, though every sound seemed too loud in the silence. He had disabled the cameras in this section, using old codes from his days as a tactical officer. The system barely questioned authority from someone of his rank. Nara waited in the cell, her eyes alert as the door slid open. She stood without a word, her chains already gone, the locks melted by a plasma torch he had stolen from engineering earlier. That day the air between them held no need for explanation. She simply nodded, understanding the unspoken truth that there was no turning back. Ryland handed her a small breathing unit and a cloak, standard issue for external exposure. She accepted, both with the same calm grace that had haunted him since the first day he saw her. They moved through the maintenance decks where the air smelled of oil and dust, and the walls were lined with pipes that hissed softly like whispers of doubt echoing. Through the dark he led her past the patrol zones, avoiding the guards whose routines he had studied for years. They passed by the observation ports where the stars drifted like frozen fire, each one a silent witness to what they were about to do. Kara glanced at the view, her expression unreadable, her eyes reflecting starlight, and for a moment, Ryland thought she looked more like part of the universe than any prisoner of war. The escape pod bay lay ahead, small and forgotten, used only for drills and emergencies. The door was sealed with biometric access, but Ryland had already overridden the system. His fingers trembled slightly as he keyed in the final sequence. The console flashed green and the door opened with a low hiss, revealing the sleek silver shell of the pod waiting in the dark, its panels illuminated by faint blue light. Kara hesitated for the first time, her gaze meeting his. She asked him if he was certain, for there would be no return, no pardon, only exile. He told her that certainty no longer mattered, that the only choice left worth making was the one that felt human. She studied him a moment longer, then stepped inside the pod, her movements silent and graceful like the beginning of a forgotten dream. He followed her, sealing the hatch behind them, the hum of the ship fading as the pod systems came alive. The countdown began, the numbers glowing across the console, the soft vibration of power building beneath their feet as the clamps released and the small vessel drifted free from the bay. Ryland looked through the viewport, watching the colossal warship shrink against the endless field of stars. Alarms began to echo faintly behind them, a chorus of distant voices realizing too late what had been done. Yet he felt no fear, only the strange, quiet relief of a man who had finally broken his own chains. The pod drifted into the vast silence of space, leaving behind the warship that had once been Ryland's world and the alarms that screamed his name as traitor. The stars surrounded them, endless and cold, yet filled with a strange, quiet promise. The engines of the small vessel hummed beneath, their feet steady and low. As they moved farther into the unknown, Kara sat across from him, her gaze fixed on the horizon of light that curved beyond the glass. She said nothing, and she did not need to, for the silence carried more meaning than words could. Roland checked the navigation systems. The coordinates were set for a neutral sector, a stretch of unclaimed space far beyond the patrol routes of the Earth fleets. It was a place he had only heard of in passing, a refuge for those who no longer belonged to any side. He had no guarantee they would make it. The pod's fuel reserves were limited, the sensors weak, and the universe vast and indifferent, but still, he felt a sense of calm, unlike anything he had known since the war began. For the first time his actions were not bound by orders or rank. They were his alone. Kara finally spoke, her voice quiet like the echo of wind through a long-forgotten temple. She asked him what he would do if they survived, if they found a place where no one hunted them. He hesitated before answering, saying he did not know, that perhaps he would learn to live without a weapon in his hand. Perhaps he would try to remember what it meant to be human. She nodded slowly, her eyes glinting in the faint light. She told him that survival was not enough, that living meant finding meaning beyond pain, and that forgiveness, even of oneself, was the hardest battle to fight. Hours passed as the pod glided through darkness, stars trailing like silver dust behind them. Kara closed her eyes and rested, and Ryland watched her for a long time, wondering how Someone who had lost so much could still carry such peace within her. He thought of the men and women still aboard the ship, the generals, who would erase his name from every record, the soldiers who would never know why he left, and he felt neither regret nor anger, only an acceptance that his war had ended, not in death but in choice. The sensors flickered warning of an approaching patrol. He took the controls guiding the pod toward a nearby asteroid field. Their only cover, the rocks drifted, slow and silent, massive shapes turning in the void. He threaded the vessel through the gaps, the hull groaning under the pressure of speed, the lights dimming as power rerouted to the engines. When they finally cleared the last stone, the stars opened, before them bright and endless, and the warning signals faded into silence. Rylan leaned back against the seat, his chest heavy with exhaustion, yet somewhere deep inside he felt the faint pulse of something new, something that might have been hope. Kara turned to him, her expression soft, her voice barely above a whisper, saying that perhaps even in a universe built on war, peace could begin with two souls who chose to stop fighting. He met her gaze, and for the first time since the war began, he smiled, not in victory but in release, as the pod carried them toward the edge of the stars and the promise of a life they would have to invent together.